Okay, so for today's session, we will be covering the topic of safety for travelers and different tools travelers can use before, during, and after their travels. After the presentation, we will have a brief Q&A. So if you had any questions regarding the topic that weren't answered during the presentation, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll get to the question during the Q&A session at the end. Also, just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have your camera on, please be mindful of your background. And again, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box below. And also, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can refer to the Zoom webpage, or you can also phone in. There was a phone number included in the registration link that you can look up. And also, without further ado, let us begin. To see who all is joining us, as always, I'm going to launch a poll. Let me pull that up real quick. So the poll is basically asking, how do you identify? Are you student, staff, faculty, alumni, maybe a parent? Maybe you're with another organization. So we just like to know. And I see the answers are coming in. All right. Okay, give it a couple more seconds, maybe 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right, we're gonna end the poll. Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of staff, definitely a lot of staff, and we have some faculty. Welcome, thank you. And we have a couple students. Thank you very much. All righty. So just a quick introduction for me. As I mentioned before, my name is Angelica Gilbo, and I'm the program coordinator for the Office of International Safety and Security here at Kennesaw State University, and I'm also today's moderator. Also with us today are our presenters. So we have the Director of Office of International Safety and Security, Aaron Rash, and we also have the Director of the Office of Emergency Management, Andy Altizer. So I will now turn it over to Erin to get us started. Erin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it, Angelica. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. So this is, again, the third of our series focusing on safety abroad. My name is Erin Rash, and I'm the Director of International Safety and Security here at Kennesaw State University. And today I am pleased to introduce my co-presenter, Andy Altizer. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, I think you're muted.
Hold on.
Okay.
All right, there I am. I'm Andy Altizer. I'm the Emergency Management Director here at Kennesaw State University, and thanks for asking me to join the program. Other than that, I'm looking at a few names and know quite a few people. Hopefully, you'll get some benefit out of this class, and try to make it enjoyable as well. And that's really it. I've traveled quite a bit internationally myself, on both fun and not so much fun, but that's me. I always like to tell people my best international travel was in the middle of the SARS epidemic, whenever that was, 16, 17 years ago, to adopt a baby girl from China. So, and then I've, like so many others, had a lot of travel and look forward to your questions.
Wonderful. Okay, so if we want to get moving to the next slide. So as we mentioned previously, today we're going to focus primarily on travel safety and how to stay safe while traveling abroad. Again, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box there. We'll start with our usual resources, what you should know before you go. Then I'll turn it over to Andy to actually get into the details about safety abroad and how to stay safe. And then I'll wrap up a little bit with some KSU protocol and international safety response, just in general, as well as specifics for our KSU travelers. And then we'll finish up with our question and answer. So a bit of a repeat from our previous session, but when we talk about the risks, we're really talking about what specifically threatens us abroad. So what can I expect to encounter in my situation, and also what steps can I take to prevent that threat? So we can categorize threats in a lot of different ways, but for the purposes of this presentation and series, I've sort of lumped them into criminal threats in terms of our security threats, accidents and illnesses, which cross into both health and safety concerns, and natural disasters, which really hits on all three of those health, safety, and security points. And we did cover illnesses quite extensively already, as well as we touched on accidents, but today we'll be primarily focusing on natural disasters as well as accidents to cover the safety concerns while traveling. And our next session, the final session for the criminal threats, will be on security before we move into our final session on data security. So that's sort of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. If we want to move on. Perfect. So when we talk about what threatens us abroad, specifically in the context of traveling internationally, there's this great Egyptian proverb that I always love to use in my presentations and trainings. And it's because we focused on the snake, we missed the scorpion. So I really like that image there. We focus on sort of the things, the big picture things, right? So we have this perception that terrorism and natural disasters and armed conflicts are the bigger threats. They seem scary. They tend to take up a lot of the headlines. We kind of have, as humans, have this tendency to maybe blow them a bit more out of proportion. And then we unfortunately ignore some of the more hidden threats or things that may be more commonplace, common occurrences that are right there under our feet, right, that we don't think about. But they're the things that we encounter day to day, and unfortunately are more numerous and more tragic because of the cumulative death toll that we can accrue over time from these incidents. So on the screen, you'll see some data that is collected from the U.S. Department of State, as well as the Forum on Education Abroad, that highlights the difference between our perceptions, as well as the reality as it pertains to mortality of U.S. citizens, and also, unfortunately, our study abroad student population. So in reality, we see it's actually transportation issues. Drowning is a major one for both, study abroad students as well as for just U.S. travelers in general, as well as accidental fall is one that we see a lot, unfortunately, in study abroad. So those are kind of some of the things that we're going to focus on a bit more today in this session. One of the key resources that my office directs travelers to in trying to identify what the specific risks are in a given location is primarily the United States Department of State travel advisories, which are found at travel.state.gov. So this is a wonderful resource to direct and get your initial information when you're doing your preliminary research. Back in January of 2018, the government basically overhauled their entire system. So it used to be a system of travel warnings and alerts, which basically only gave information for those countries that were perceived to be more dangerous, or maybe there was some sort of tension between our country and that particular area or region. They overhauled the system in 2018, and they introduced this travel advisory system, which assigned a travel advisory to every single country. So bringing it more in line with a lot of other government organizations out there that do similar advisory levels for all countries. And so they issued a 4-tiered system. So the 4 guidance levels are level 1, which is your exercise normal precautions. You'll see that there on the screen in blue. And this pertains to our standard and universal risks that are inherent in really any location worldwide. You can't get rid of risk. It's going to be there. So we look first for level 1 and sort of use that as our sort of threshold, our base level. And then we step up to level 2, and that's exercise increased caution. And once we get to level 2, we're starting to introduce a little bit more nuance into the interpretation. So once we get to level 2, that's when the Department of State has also come up with, they have this system of risk indicators. And I tried really, really hard to come up with a good anagram or method of remembering all of these. And the best I could come up with was Techno-U. And then the Department of State decided to add in K for kidnapping and threw that off. So I don't have a really good mnemonic or device to remember that. But on the screen, you'll see the list of what those risk indicators are that have been identified by the government. And so again, when we get to that level 2 advisory, then the Department of State is using those risk indicators to tell us, hey, here, there's something additional you need to look at. And there's some additional information you may need or additional considerations that you might want to factor into your decision making before you go to this particular location. The next level, oh, sorry, go back one more. Sorry, level 3, we have reconsider travel. And again, we're stepping up the game, right? We're getting to stronger language, reconsider. This is when the Department of State starts using words like avoid. And personally, when the government is telling me to avoid something, I think there's probably a good reason for that. And I would want to not necessarily go someplace if I didn't have a really strong and compelling reason to be there. So we really need to start taking that into consideration as travelers when we're making our plans. Do we need to be there? And then the final level, level 4, is do not travel. And that's about as explicit as the government can really get. When it comes to a country with a level 4, you know, this is our war zones, there's conflict regions. We should really approach these locations with caution and think about, is there a strong enough justification for us to be there or to transit through these areas? When it comes to planning for these locations, the government's advice is very macabre. It's very to the point. They say, if you're going there, make a will, make a plan for your dependents. So this really hits home with, you know, there's some strong and credible threats to our health and safety for going to these locations, and we want to take that into consideration. Okay, and on the next slide, we now see how to really interpret and read an actual travel advisory. So on this screen, this one is Ghana. This particular screenshot was current for July 17th of 2019. They've actually tweaked it just a little bit, but haven't gone in to update it since then. And advisories are supposed to be reviewed every year, so I anticipate that this will change in the next couple of weeks. But this is what is basically current for Ghana. At the top of the screen, you'll see there's the blue bar, which indicates what the countrywide travel advisory is for Ghana. And it's blue, which corresponds with the level 1 color coding, so exercise normal precautions. However, if we look, we also see in the corner, there's the little C and the U risk indicators. So that's kind of telling us, hey, there might be some additional things we need to factor in and look at. So if you scroll down just a little bit on the screen, you'll see, okay, so we need to exercise increased caution in certain areas, which means level 2. So there are regional advisories as well as countrywide advisories when it comes to risk levels through the Department of State travel advisory system. So we would read and we'd say, okay, you know, exercise increased caution if I'm going to urban areas, you know, if I'm going to inner city travel or inner highways during, you know, nighttime hours. If I'm going to border areas, then there's going to be an increased risk for crime. Or if I'm going to these other specific areas, there may be an increased risk for civil unrest. And then based on that, you can also, for any countries, keep scrolling down and get more information about general safety and security information for that location. There are additional topics you can review. There might be local laws to look at, transportation concerns to explore. So it's a great starting place for getting a good understanding of what the risk profile is in a particular location. Other resources, once you've done your initial benchmarking with the Department of State, you can definitely go and look at the Overseas Security Advisory Council, or OSAC. They put out something called a crime and safety report, which I may touch on a little bit more in our next presentation, but there's fantastic information about trends in a particular location. Also, you might want to look at some of the guidance put out by some of the other sort of bigger of 4 English-speaking governments out there, like the UK, Australia, Canada, and see what they're saying. Is there any nuance there? Is it pretty much agreeing with what the Department of State is saying? So you may get a bit more of a nuanced or interpretation, or you might get additional details that maybe just weren't considered because it hadn't affected maybe US citizens, but it has affected a British citizen traveling abroad. We talked about the insurance as well as the security assistance provider resources through On Call International in a previous session, so I won't go into that further now. And then the last piece of advice, always please enroll in the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, the STEP program. That way you can get up-to-date information or alerts about things that are happening while you're traveling in country. And one thing that I encourage all travelers to have is an emergency action plan. It sounds very official and scary, but it is essentially just a means of knowing, how to get in touch with people. How do I connect with people in an emergency? So personally, I would recommend that you store all your important and emergency contacts in your cell phone, store them as your contacts, but also keep maybe in your wallet, a sort of a card, business card, or some sort of folded up, sheet of paper that's got the local 911, local embassy and consulate, your insurance card, information. Also, I want to use this opportunity to plug KSU's 24/7 police number if you happen to be traveling for university purposes, if you're doing university business travel abroad, or if you're on a study abroad program. Please, keep that number with you and feel free to reach out if you need anything. But basically, in an emergency, the first thing to really get overloaded or go down is probably going to be your cell service. And that's what a lot of us rely on to get in touch with people. So one thing I would encourage all travelers to do is to plan an emergency meeting place. So most of the time we would say, okay, if we get separated in an emergency and we need to regroup, let's go back to our accommodations. Let's go back to our hotel. That makes sense. It's a place where we can stay, hunker down for a long period of time. It's got all our stuff there. Great. It's a wonderful first meeting place. But if you're in London and you happen to have been out on a Saturday night a couple years back and, exploring town, and all of a sudden there's an incident at the, London Bridge, and suddenly your hotel is now caught up in a security perimeter and you cannot get back to your hotel room. Have a secondary backup place where you can meet up with, your traveling, companions, your group. Ideally, I would say about 10 blocks away from your accommodation so that it wouldn't hopefully get caught up in something like a security perimeter. Think about a place where you can stay for a couple of hours if need be as a US citizen. So, potentially it's a coffee shop that you could meet at and stay at, but potentially you might want to think about other American hotel chains that are reputable and that, you could go and hang out in the lobby. And we're very fortunate as US citizens a lot of times that we, can do that. We can walk into a lobby and sit down. And in an American hotel chain, we're probably not going to be asked to leave, especially if there is a major incident going on. So just try and plan ahead and have those numbers and those backup plans in your phone or in your head or someplace accessible, and just sort of think about them ahead of time so that when you are ready to go, you're on board, whoever you're traveling with is on board, and you know where to go and how to meet up. And with that, I will turn it over to Andy to sort of get us started and introduce some of the safety concerns and how to be safe.
Okay, thank you. We'll cover these, but I agree with what Aaron said, that some of the, what I call the Gucci sexy topics of terrorism and these other things we see on the news every night is not I would not consider your primary concern, but they're still concerns. And some other, we'll get into very specific parts about crime, I believe, in the next section. In my opinion, crime's your number one concern when you travel abroad. But then again, crime's a concern when you go to downtown Atlanta or really any area where there's where you're not really familiar with what's going on. I would say the other part of crime is cybercrime. It's more if you've ever traveled and had your identity stolen while you travel, it's horrible. I've had my credit card skimmed at the Atlanta airport, and when I landed in St. Louis, it basically meant my wonderful credit card company, who it was a good thing, but they turned off my credit card and now I had no money. And my next place to visit was a rental car place. So kind of think that through a little bit too. I know yesterday or the last session you covered health. I would probably, especially if you were a student, consider that something to take very seriously. Those of us have traveled to places like China. I've traveled to other places like Kuwait and Afghanistan and Oman. Anything you can know about those countries, health-wise, it will be very important to you. I remember traveling somewhere where there's different kinds of insects that bite. I've never seen those insects before until I got there. And it was good to know what I was supposed to do if I got, bit by one. I think a little bit diving into the transportation, car accidents are always a concern in different countries. Hopefully some of you will have the opportunity to drive on the other side of the road. Caution, of course, but it's quite an experience. And you should get to do that as well too. No matter what we're talking about, every topic you see on that screen, it comes down to two responses, is to trust your instincts and to use common sense. And we'll still go through every one of these. I tell people, if it doesn't look right, it's probably not right. In today's world, as I tell my daughter, who's a freshman in college next year, who's traveled abroad quite a bit, if something doesn't look right, walk away. That seems overly simplified, but don't get caught up in the area. Too many people see something, get involved, they're nosy or they want to watch or it seems kind of exciting, and then it's too late. And so that's my major advice to her. So the same kind of advice to you. So those are just some of the common safety concerns. We'll go to, I appreciate Erin putting on water safety. Maybe she could talk about that a little more. I don't swim well, but I know my limitations, and I would not spend a lot of time out on the ocean, I guess. The alcohol, a lot of things, again, my daughter, I use as an example a lot, went to Italy last year with her Latin club. And I think she was able to drink wine at 16 or 17 years old. They didn't clear that with me, but you just got to know what the laws are there, the cultural norms. We spend a lot of time talking about don't set your drink down, and it seems kind of preachy. Don't accept a drink from a stranger. I know the students get tired of hearing that. I did see something the other day that our former dean of students passed around that said there's some things out there that you could tell if your drink has been tainted by the color. So I'm glad certain folks out there are looking at those. The drug law is different. I don't know what our study abroad program is, how we react to that, but I will tell you from experience to be very careful, especially if you ever want a security clearance in your life. It doesn't necessarily mean what their drug laws will apply to you 10 or 15 years down the road. So I would caution a little extra care in that area. Fire safety abroad, there's really no different than, I don't think you're going to be staying in some real hazardous areas. I've been to countries like Kuwait City that is about as affluent as it could be. And then one block to the east or west of downtown Kuwait City
is unfortunately pretty impoverished area. There are fire hazards. I don't think you'll be going to those, but just common sense again. I think Aaron touched on it. 911 doesn't probably work in a lot of different countries. Know how to call the fire department. Like here, know your exits, have an escape route. The alarms are sometimes different. We learned that in the United States for some of our international students. A typical alarm that sounds for in the United States doesn't necessarily represent the kind of fire alarm in different countries. Nothing to get overly worried about. My advice would be, if you hear something loud and it sounds like it doesn't belong, it probably means you need to evacuate that area. And again, here's the same thing. Every time the alarm sounds, leave. Again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. That goes for all of us. We've had a rash of fire alarms in Kennesaw Hall over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I can assure you, when I go over there, excuse me, by the third alarm on the same day, there's no one evacuating. That's the third time, maybe the one that there's a real fire. The other thing we hear, there's a smoke in the building, but there's no fire. Well, that's not true. If there's smoke, you need to get out of there. And then the most common thing is your kitchen. Again, especially on a college campus. For some reason, the Austin resident complex loves to have little popcorn fires. We have them quite often. And I'm the same way. If I've had 2 kitchen fires in my life, and it's both times due to negligence on part of the cook, me. Hotel safety. This is one of my favorite topics, but I'm not going to spend 2 hours. I also used to teach a kind of travel safety abroad for people going, leaving the United States for other military destinations. And the 2 areas we spent a tremendous amount of time was hotels and actual travel itself in the airport and on the airplane. So I'll try not to get too crazy on this one. If you are going and staying in a hotel, try to find a hotel that uses cards to open from the inside, not the old motel like the Kennesaw Inn. If you've ever been over there, it's a beautiful place. And then common sense, try to find a place. Again, everyone has it now. It's at a peephole and a deadbolt lock. Secure the chain. Push a rubber stop underneath. My daughter went to Belmont University last summer, not this summer, for violin camp. And I told her she had to take a doorstop just to be careful, because I didn't know what her residence hall room looked like. And she rolled her eyes, and then I still put it in there. And then when I got home after dropping her off, it was on her bed. So, what is there? I travel with a doorstop. Again, I'm the crazy guy that goes a little eccentric on this. But putting that extra, rubber stop and really, wedging it in there, it's just an added level of security. I use the deadbolt. I use the chain. I use the doorstop. I do it all. I turn on the television when I leave and have music or the news playing to kind of give an indication I'm in there. And I've never had a problem in my room. Stay near the stairwell if you can, so you can exit rather quickly. The second through sixth floors is kind of, people think, why is that? First of all, usually on the first floor, you obviously don't need any additional access control to get to the first floor, because that's where the lobby is. A lot of your reputable hotels now, even to get to the upper floors, you have to have your card, your access card has to work for those floors as well. A lot of people don't realize that even major cities like Atlanta, that the fire trucks, the ladder trucks in downtown Atlanta do not reach beyond the 5th floor. Some reach a little bit higher, some reach only to the 4th floor. And is that crazy stuff? Yeah, probably so. But if you have a choice, why not? I kind of like the 3rd floor. I figure if I had to really get out and I had no other choice, that I'm going to do okay on the 2nd or the 3rd floor. The distance between the hotel and road is kind of a balanced approach. You don't want to get so far off the beaten path that you're in maybe an area that you don't particularly like. But then if you happen to stay on a right down town somewhere, and if there was an incident or a terrorist bombing on the main road, you'd be a little bit more in danger. And in today's world, do not advertise your nationality. Just, in my opinion, keep to yourself. You don't need to say who you are in case someone has a issue with your country of origin, and then it's a no-brainer. Again, you can do a lot more. If you ever want to listen to this whole entire hotel safety, I'll be glad to give it to you. I give it to my daughter all the time. I'm a martial arts guy, so I get kind of crazy. And I tell her, when she travels, when you go to the front desk and you check in, and when you go to the elevator, if there's someone behind you, pause. Let that person, especially if you don't know, of course, if you don't know who they are, let them get on. Act like you're checking your laptop bag, and then don't get on with them. If someone follows you in the elevator and you're on the 3rd floor, go to the 4th floor and then work your way down. So again, you can get and a lot of it just depends on where you're going. Probably in the next session, you'll hear the phrase, know before you go. Everything you know about that country. Again, it used to be 20 years ago in certain parts of Europe, you worried about pickpocketers. Again, now, today, you're worried about scammers. Natural disasters, whatever could happen here could happen there. Of course, the latest I checked, the day we get hit by a tsunami in Atlanta, we're in bad trouble. I mean, it's one of those Godzilla things coming across the water. But you just never know. Again, if you're going to Japan or Vietnam or somewhere like that, it's good to know what's the tsunami warning sound like and what are you supposed to do. Back in, I forgot the New Year's Eve, was it 2001 or 2002, the big tsunami? So many people heard the warning and did not heed the advice. And I think a couple of 100,000 people died. So again, if you're going to take action, be decisive and commit to your action. Volcano, that's just not possible. Volcanoes don't blow up unexpectedly. It's kind of crazy to put it on there, except the one that happened this weekend, or the people that were on the cruise, and several of the people have 3rd-degree burns all over the body. If you didn't hear about that, just Google it after this exciting presentation and look at the woman that's got the 3rd-degree burns all over her body. So, the unthinkable sometimes could happen. The hurricanes, we get excited around here when it happens, even though we're several hundred miles inland. But some of the countries you may go to, especially in, like India or China, if you're on there, we have, big hurricanes here, but over the last couple of years, they have catastrophic hurricanes. So floods too, if there's a flash flood. And there's a great video out there of someone watching a flash flood take place, where it's just kind of trickling down and there's a flash flood warning, and then it hits. And it's luckily that person was okay. They had a flood this weekend. Anyone know where? I guess we can't poll like this. Aaron, do you know where a flood was this weekend in Atlanta?
Oh, this weekend in Atlanta. What? Oh, it was on Georgia Tech campus, wasn't it?
Georgia Tech, that's right. Good job, Marisa. You get a prize. Stop by my office if you want a couple of masks. Georgia Tech, that was a 36-inch water break. That was massive. Luckily, the flow went down one of the fairly major road at Georgia Tech. If there would have been a lot of students on campus, that would have been a lot worse. So again, you strike that up, and you just never know. Photo safety. You know what, Aaron? Why don't you take this one? I have no idea. She put this on me and knew it was
Sorry about that one. Yes, so I did add a few additional ones that are a little more unique to our study abroad population. So photo safety abroad, just make sure that you are maintaining situational awareness, that you are vigilant. You know, it's fantastic to get someplace and to have that opportunity to take that great, you know, group photo. You're so excited to be there. You want to get the Eiffel Tower in the background. So you put your things down and you huddle together, and, you know, everyone's really excited, and maybe they're spelling out KSU with their arms. So you've now targeted yourself. You've pointed yourself out as a group of foreigners, right? And you're probably not watching your bags that you've put off to the side because you're too busy focusing on the camera. So also just making sure that you're being aware of not only your belongings, but also your person. How close are you getting to maybe a dangerous drop? Unfortunately, we do have a rise in accidents and unfortunately deaths related to trying to take selfies. This has primarily been a concern in certain countries, not as much with study abroad students, but still it's something to be mindful of, you know, what those dangers still are, and maintain presence of mind and understanding what's going on. Ethical considerations. Just make sure if you're taking photos of people, you're asking permission, especially when it comes to children. You know, in different cultures, there are different, you know, thoughts about that. So you want to be very mindful before you do that. And the geopolitical considerations are, especially if you're going to someplace with maybe a bit of a stronger military presence, making sure that you know what is acceptable to take a photo of. Some countries will not allow you to take photos of government buildings, military installations, military personnel, or even things like airports and airplanes. So you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're having your camera confiscated. Unfortunately, I've known some students who've had that situation occur to them while studying abroad. They were just taking, you know, pictures. They thought it was fine, didn't realize that maybe there was something in the background that probably shouldn't have been. So just be mindful of what you're doing and what you're taking pictures of, and that you have permission to take photos of what you're taking pictures of.
Okay, I know what that means now. Transportation abroad, again, if you've ever traveled to certain countries, their transportation habits are a little bit different than ours. Again, I think everyone should experience riding a bus into maybe one of the island countries. You know, they pass on you. I don't even know if there's yellow lines. They pass on curves. It's terrifying. But knowing, you know, what to expect. It actually, going back, I was kind of kidding. I don't necessarily, and some of you may disagree, I don't necessarily suggest that you drive in other countries if you can avoid it, unless you're just wanting an adventure. And I think all these topics are no different than certain parts of the United States, taxi safety, and even not even traffic safety. Whether you're doing Uber, you know, we have Uber concerns now. We had wasn't too long at University of South Carolina, we had an Uber student abducted. Public transportation safety. I don't know if anyone's from downtown Atlanta, and I use MARTA whenever I go down. I think that would be go down there and ride around a little bit, and before you get on downtown London to get on the tube or something like that. You would be amazed at what you see. I enjoy watching people from the airport get on MARTA, and the first thing they do is they stand up and they yell out real loud, "I'm not from this area. I'm a stranger. Please rob me." That's what, at least that's what it looks to me. A lot of times they immediately jump up and they look at the map and they run their finger up and down the map to see where they're going. Or if they're already downtown, they keep their convention name tag on, and it just really kind of tells everyone that you're easy prey. They fall asleep on public transportation, and they wonder why maybe some of their things get stolen as well. But again, common sense, trust your instincts. The other thing is stay on the beaten path most of the time. We all like to get a little adventurous, including me, and get off the beaten path. But just know where you're going and know the hazards associated with where you're possibly walking to. And again, I can give you a whole if you want to know where to sit on an airplane and where not to sit, just email me sometime. Water safety, and again, Erin put this on there because she knows I'm not a very good swimmer, although on beautiful Tybee Island, I've been caught in a rip current. The key to a rip current is don't fight it, and swim with it, and then go to the left or right and then swim your way back. It's terrifying, it's exhausting, and certain places have the likelihood of rip currents are more likely. Tybee Island is phenomenal for rip currents closer to the river from the beach, and then you can go 60 miles, 45 miles north to Hilton Head, and there's no rip currents at all. So, Erin, do you want to say anything more about that?
I would like to jump in. Yeah, that one's a pretty big one for me because it is unfortunately so prevalent among our study abroad students in general. Thankfully, not Kennesaw State students, but definitely understanding that just because the surface of the water maybe looks calm, it's not necessarily that way underneath. So making sure that we're engaging in smart decision-making processes. Not going into the water if we're intoxicated. Maybe look and see what the locals are doing. They tend to understand, what the environment is much better than we do. If there are any flags posted, if there's no lifeguard on duty, if you're by yourself, these are probably things you want to take into consideration when swimming. So again, unfortunately, there are some beaches that are going to be more susceptible to these things. Costa Rica, unfortunately, is a location that does see a high number of individuals, U.S. citizens, who do unfortunately succumb to, rip currents and things of that nature, or they engage in, outdoor activities, adventure sports, rapids, or things of that nature. And unfortunately, they're not as, maybe their skill level is not as high as it should be, or they just misjudge because they don't necessarily know what the current is like. So I just want to caution, everyone really when going into new waters is to tread carefully. And okay, thank you so much for taking us through all of those safety concerns, kind of wrapping it up and bringing it home, talking about the KSU protocol. So in the event of an emergency abroad, our students, our faculty and staff who are traveling on, education abroad programs or business, please keep that 6666 number handy, and feel free to call us and report back so that we can give you assistance. If you're a student traveling, your first point of contact should be your faculty if you're going on a faculty-led program. Let us know what's happening. If you're just traveling on your free time, if you're not affiliated with KSU, U.S. citizens can contact American Citizen Services. I've listed their number on that slide there, and they can provide assistance for any sort of emergency that comes up. They can connect you to resources. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, then your primary resource would be your country of origin's local embassy or consulate in that area. If a incident does occur, again, if you're KSU, please report it to us. You can use the brt.kennesaw.edu link. That can also be reported to us anonymously. So if there are any concerns, we normally use that for our on-campus behavior response team. For usually it's concerning behaviors, but for our purposes with education abroad, it's anything that you want to report. It's even if you aren't feeling well and need to go to the doctor, feel free to use that. If it's a minor thing, you can just email it, globalsafety@kennesaw.edu. Try and spare our BRT team so that they're not overwhelmed with those. But if it's something a bit more serious, feel free to use that BRT report, especially if you want anonymity. If you're traveling abroad and you are a victim of a crime, if something goes wrong, definitely you might want to file a police report, but think first, is it safe to do so in this location? Especially if you are unfortunately a victim of sexual harassment or sexual assault. In some locations, there can be some serious legal ramifications that you don't want to get into. So first contact the embassy or consulate, and they will be able to advise you accordingly on whether or not to proceed with filing a report with your police. If you lose your passport abroad, you may be required to, before you can obtain a new one, get a police report. So just making sure that you are aware and able to, locate the nearest police and are comfortable, being able to engage in having a conversation with them and taking a police report if needed. I used to have to explain the concept of shelter in place. Thanks to COVID-19, I don't really have to anymore. I think we're all fairly familiar at this point, but during times of political unrest, or if there's widespread transmission of disease, such as we're experiencing now, travelers may find themselves in a situation where they do have to remain in place for a period of time. So if you find that you must shelter in place, definitely make sure that you have safe food and water supplies for whatever period of time. In the case of quarantine and COVID right now, it's about a 14-week period. Make sure that you have as well access to your medications. I do encourage that you have a go bag of some sort in case of an emergency, that keep all of your necessities in that one item. If it's perhaps your carry-on while you're traveling, maybe move around some of your items from your luggage and put some of the more essential items in your carry-on if needed. So make sure that you have those prescriptions, your medications, some cash, electronics, as well as the chargers. So if your phone goes down, if you don't have any little portable charger for it, that can be problematic. You want to make sure that you're actively checking STEP for updates, as well as monitoring the local news and following the advice of the local authorities. And also, if you do find yourself in a situation where you need medical treatment, by all means, please seek that medical treatment. If you are in a situation where you are needing some mental health, counseling, you can definitely check with your insurance company, see if you can get telecounseling during that period. If you just have concerns about your medication running out, things of that nature. Again, we covered insurance extensively in the previous presentation, so just remember that that is a resource for any of your medical concerns that come up while you're traveling. And if you do need to replace your passport, make sure that you visit the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate to apply for that replacement passport in person. So you're going to have to make that appointment online prior to going. You'll want to make sure that you've completed the necessary forms to sort of expedite the process a bit. So you want to make sure you have a copy of the DS-11 form and the copy of the DS-64 if it is lost or stolen, which for most short-term travelers, that might be the case. Also, again, if it's stolen, you're probably going to have to go fill out that police report and submit that along with your application to get a replacement or a temporary passport issued to you. You want to have a passport photo. You can get them at certain embassies. They have a little kiosk where you pay a certain amount of money and you can get it on site when you go in for your application for your appointment to get your temporary replacement. And you're going to also want to have the replacement fee. A lot of times with your passport replacement, it will be just a really temporary, they'll print it out, and then when you get home, you can sort of mail it in and get the official one. So you'll be expected to pay what the cost is for a new, essentially, passport if you do lose your passport while you're abroad. You also want to have additional supporting documentation. So you're going to need to have a copy of your itinerary, like an airplane ticket, some sort of schedule that shows, when you're planning to depart the country. You want to have, to the extent possible, evidence of your U.S. identification. So if you have a driver's license on you, If you have a color copy of your passport, and I stress this with our students in orientations, to please bring one with you and store it in a safe location, or have access to it somehow, be it via our Education Abroad application portal, or if you have a parent that has a copy of it on file that they can get it to you if you need it. That's going to help you with that process of getting your replacement issued. And also, if you are not a U.S. citizen, again, just make sure that you're checking with your local embassy or consulate to find out what the steps are for you to get a replacement issued. With that, I want to say thank you so much. We hope that the information presented today was very useful. Our next session is going to be Monday, July 13th, and that one will be on our physical or personal security abroad. That'll be at 3 p.m. on that evening, as well as we start kind of going into our home stretch of these series of presentations. And with that, I will turn it over to Angelica for all of your questions.
Aaron, can I say something about?
Yes, sorry.
Even though it's not, shouldn't be in your top 2 or 3 ways to communicate to campus, but remember, Live Safe Works Abroad. If you want to get a message out to someone, you could fill out a Live Safe tip and send that. It goes to our 24/7 communication center, and they could also chat back and forth with you. I'll tell you, if you do that, you'll have to be, explain to them where you are and why you are sending them a tip if you're in downtown Paris. And if you don't mind me plugging a couple, take some more classes before you go. We're teaching the Civilian Response to Active Shooter tomorrow at 2 o'clock remotely. You just have to, you can email me since you won't remember the instructor's name. They're free. They're about an hour long. We teach rape aggressive defensive class. That's an in-person class that hopefully we'll be able to bring back sometime in the fall semester. It's a great class for everyone, in my opinion, especially for women. And again, I don't want to think any of these bad things are going to happen. The Stop the Bleed class. If you go, for example, hiking the trails of the Appalachian and you don't have a tourniquet and know how to use it and you're by yourself, everyone should have to take the class. We got an email yesterday from a staff member who used that information over the phone to save someone's life. So don't hesitate to take that, and a couple more and I'll shut up. Traveling with children, since we have so many staff on this, it can be terrifying. Make sure you have a picture of your child, an updated picture of your child in your wallet. Every time you go out, make sure you know what your kid is wearing, the color of their clothes. It's amazing how we don't know that. And finally, if you happen to be a staff member working on your emergency management certificate, email me that you've had this class, and we will use this as one of your elective classes and send you one of our beautiful certificates. We'll put Aaron's name on it, and I'll fake her signature on there, and then you will knock out one of the classes. So thank you.
Alrighty, thank you both, Aaron and Andy, for sharing all this information. These are definitely some things to keep in mind while we're traveling. So we have a couple of minutes left. We will now head into the Q&A portion. And if you have any questions, again, you can put them in the chat box below, and we'll be here to answer your questions. And let me go ahead and pull up the chat box. All right, I'll just wait a couple seconds since we have about 5 more minutes left. Okay. All right. Well, it seems like Aaron, oh. Okay. Yes, so can I watch the previous sections? Of course you can. So we do record these sessions, and you can find them on our website. And we'll also send out this session in the email that is to come afterwards. So you can find it on the website, and you can also see it in the email that will come after this session. Good question.
See if I can send the link in the chat right here. So if anyone wants it. there's the link if you want to go ahead, and that should take you directly to the previous sessions as well.
Okay.
No questions on Andy's awesome jacket?
No. What is this? You are very welcome. Douglas Moody, very good. All right, well, I guess we can wrap things up. If our presenters don't have anything else or any questions from the attendees, again, I want to say thank you all for joining us, both the presenters and the attendees. Again, our next session will be July 13th, and we will be discussing personal security abroad. So a little bit different than safety abroad. And if you if you're looking for more resources, you can go to our website, which Erin put that in the chat box, or you can email us at globalsafety@kennesaw.edu. And that concludes our session. I hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you.